Today on the She Found Motherhood podcast, I speak with Sam and Megan from Island Kids Physio. They are both pediatric physiotherapists, and we're talking about the benefits of baby wearing. So, in today's podcast, we'll go over all of the benefits of baby wearing. We'll talk about how you need to correctly position your baby when you are doing baby wearing. And we'll chat about a few of the different types of slings, wraps, and carriers and some of our favorites. So we'll talk to you just after this quick reminder.
Welcome to the She Found Motherhood podcast. We are doctors Sarah and Alicia, maternity physicians and moms who have been through it all. We want to empower you with knowledge so you can have the best pregnancy, birth, and postpartum experience you can.
She Found Health and She Found Motherhood is meant for general medical information only. The content of this podcast is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. This information does not apply to every situation. If you have questions or if you've received different advice, please contact your healthcare provider. Always seek the advice of your physician or another qualified health provider with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition. The views expressed by She Found Health and She Found Motherhood and our guests are not representative of any of the institutions with which we are affiliated. Some of our podcast episodes are sponsored so that we can keep getting great info out there to you, our listeners. We only partner with companies that we truly believe in. Some of our links and suggestions may be affiliates, and we would appreciate you using them to help fund this important work. Now let's get to it.
Sam and Megan, thank you for joining us today on the She Found Motherhood podcast. We are going to be talking about the evidence and the benefits around baby wearing. Now, for anybody who doesn't know, Sam and Megan are both physiotherapists, and they, I think, both own and work at Island Kids Physio here in Victoria, BC. So they are experts in this field, and they're both mamas and have done this before themselves. So why don't we get started around what are the benefits of baby? First of all, what is baby wearing? What are we talking about?
So baby wearing is where we are wearing our babies in a wrap or a ring sling or a carrier around them newborn ages. And so that's what we'll talk about today as well. There's all those different ranges of age, lots of different types of carriers as well.
Cool. So why don't we get into what the benefits of baby wearing are?
Absolutely. And we obviously speak from mostly, we'll talk in our clinic about our perspective as physiotherapists, but also as moms and just as pediatric infant healthcare providers. One of the first ones from really young is just that bonding, that attachment piece of baby wearing. So being close to mom or dad, being close to the heartbeat, and actually babies. It's really interesting. I know there's some really interesting research around actually how babies' breathing and heart rate actually potentially can change based on the person that they are in close contact with. So right from early, I know there's a massive benefit from that perspective. That's less the physio perspective, but more the general newborn care perspective, that the attachment, bonding, regulation piece is huge for baby wearing in that, especially in that really young age.
Yeah, I was just doing a little bit of some research before this just to understand a little bit more. And they just did a recent study about a year ago in attachment in teenage or like young moms who sometimes traditionally have had a little bit of a harder time kind of forming those secure attachments. And so they did a little study, 1 hour a day of baby wearing versus 1 hour a day of reading to your baby. And they did that for 3 months, I think, starting at age 2 to 4 and 2 to 4 weeks. And there was much like a correlation. So there was this increase in secure attachment in those young parents who did the baby wearing versus the reading, which was really interesting.
That's really neat. That's super cool to hear. Yeah.
That's really cool. And then another big benefit that we've actually spoken about before, Alicia, is getting the pressure off baby's head. So obviously at that newborn age, in those first 3 months, baby spends most of their time on their back. So baby wearing really helps to reduce any of those flat on the back of the head there by having them close up and not having any pressure areas on the back of their head. And that's a really nice way when we're treating plagiocephaly and around those areas, that flat spot piece. We always recommend baby wearing as part of repositioning and just getting that pressure off the back of baby's head as well. It's a really nice way of doing that.
Yeah, and we did a podcast on that. So anybody who's listening, if you want to learn a little bit more about plagiocephaly or plagiocephaly and torticollis, then have a listen to that podcast that the three of us did together.
Absolutely. Another great benefit, particularly with young babies, so that 0 to 2 month-ish range, is that it can serve as some tummy time. Now, we have to be cautious here as physios because some parents will see a baby who's 4 months, 5 months, still saying that their tummy time is in the carrier. And when they get older, they do really need that time on the floor. But for those newport, working on some of that neck strength, being in a carrier can be really helpful. When we talk about positioning, we'll talk about why, but for baby to look at their caregiver's face they will have to lift their neck and actually use those muscles. So it is an easier version of lifting the head off the floor. Gravity is not quite as difficult to overcome in the more upright position. So it's a really nice early way to incorporate the feeling of pressure on baby's tummy and working on those neck muscles without having to just put them on the floor, where a brand newborn who's just come out of being all cozy, comfy in the womb is really not pleased to be in that position. But in a carrier, they're snug, they're all flexed up, they feel really good. And that's a great place for them to start working on that head control. And
really
always
nice
as a physio. Yeah,
always
physios will make sure they get time on the floor. You have to also have time on the floor.
I think it's not as physio related, but it's also really nice for dads as well. So both Meg and I found that it was really nice for dads to be able to have that bonding experience by having baby on them as well in the wrap or a carrier. And that's really nice just to also for mum to have a little bit of a break so dad can carry them too.
Awesome. I hadn't actually thought about that. Brilliant. Yeah. And I think just we're going to use moms and dads, but we also mean partners, non-breastfeeding partners, or any parent really. And I think in some of the studies I was looking at, some people just don't like the carrier, or they feel touched out especially as a breastfeeding parent, you feel really touched out, and partners don't really know how to support. So they can actually do the baby wearing after the breastfeeding partner has done the feeding. And then that is an amazing way that they can bond with their baby, but also give their partner some time to not be touched.
Exactly.
Right?
Totally agree with that touched out piece. And that's definitely something we discuss with mums in clinic as well. And they're like, I just need a minute. And it's absolutely, your partner can wear them just as much. It doesn't need to be that breastfeeding person all of the time or around that piece. I think it's so important to have that out there as well.
Any other benefits that you guys have of baby wearing?
Another piece is less in the brand newborn, but later on, there's some good research, and we'll talk about positioning, but with good, appropriate positioning, it can really help to facilitate healthy hip development. A lot of the negative studies or questions or queries around baby wearing, more old ones, but because people are much more aware now, but have been negative about the hip development and hips not being in a good position. But the alternative is, with the new research coming out, if the hips are well positioned in a carrier, it actually can contribute to healthy hip development. And even babies who may have hip dysplasia in a spike in order to get their hips nice and wide, it's a nice place for them to be. They can actually be well positioned in a carrier as well to help those hips develop how we want them to. So as long as it's positioned, more and more research is coming out that it can really promote healthy hip development for babies.
Awesome. Cool. So I think we are going to then move on to, let's talk a little bit about that position. What are your tips around positioning your babies in wraps? And these wraps and carriers, and these will be a bit different depending on the wrap and carrier, I presume.
So I think there's a really nice acronym that we also use called T.I.C.K.S. And this is a really nice general one when we're thinking of how to remember how to position baby. And so T is height. So slings and carriers should be tight enough to hug your baby close to you, as this will be most comfortable for baby as well as parents as well, because it's really important to remember yourself here as well, and your back and how comfortable you are wearing baby, especially as they get in view at all times. So you should be able to see your baby's face by simply glancing down. And the fabric of the sling or the carrier should not be around them, so you don't need to open it up all the time to check on baby. Close enough to kiss, that's a big one that we always recommend, is that's kind of head position, close enough for us to kiss baby there. Keeping the chin off the chest, as Megan said, some of those more negative research articles are around the breathing piece as well. So making sure that chin is not down on the chest is really important to allow that baby can breathe really well, and there's no concerns there. And then the S of T.I.C.S is supported back. So making sure that baby in the carrier is held comfortably so that their back is supported in a natural position and their tummy and chest are against you. And then from that T.I.C.S piece is that M shape, as Megan said, with that natural hip development and the reducing that risk of hip dysplasia. We really like that M position. So the knees are higher than those hips in the carriers. And we will talk a little bit more about where we bring in an infant insert for those really new little newborns where that M shape may not be actually the right position for those newborns.
Great. And I'm going to be honest, I did a lot of baby wearing, but I used either the wrap or like the Ergo. I never used a ring sling, because my impression of a ring sling was one of those ones that you can't actually adjust and sits like a big bag. And so those ones can have concerns, especially with preemie babies, around not being able to protect their airway. But if you follow that T.I.C.S through, you wouldn't even use that because they can't actually tighten it so baby's close to you regardless. I learned a little bit, and I have that T.I.C.S. I have a nice little PDF, a little downloadable PDF. So I will put that in the show notes,
really
and people
nice
can go
PDF
check that out.
And I found it really useful to just remind myself even. right? When you're going through and checking, because it's harder to see on yourself, I think. So it's nice to have something you can refer to.
Yeah, and I know about the ring sling because I know that some people really love them. So if you're following that along, the one thing people really don't know, and also sometimes in a wrap when baby's really little, is where to put the hip. And again, some of the research, again, the more negative research is around when parents just don't know how to position baby. When you're using, or even like your Ergo or whatever other brand, when they're really young, that's where the insert comes in. We don't worry as much about the M position of the hip. What we really want is flexion of the hip. So brand new babies, you know them, they're so all curled up nice and tight, hard to even change their diaper because their legs, you feel like you have to pull so hard to even break that flexion. That's a beautiful position for a brand new baby. So again, that 0 to maybe up to about 2 months, we want them nice and tight and curled. And that's where I know the Ergo, the insert I found it very hard to put my baby in it, but I agree. Try to create that flexion position. But the same thing would apply to a wrap, like a Sully wrap or something like that. When baby is still quite young, we're not trying to force their hips wide into that M position, but making sure that they're really nice and curled up tight. So knees right up to baby's chest, hips flexed right up. That's a really nice safe position for baby's hips. What we don't want for all age of babies, particularly up to about 6 months when hips are really developing, is that we don't want baby's legs hanging down, straight down. For people maybe just wondering why, when babies are born, they don't have a really nice deep hip socket yet. That develops over time with flexion, with kicking, with eventually weight bearing. Babies create a nice deep hip socket. However, if babies spend too much time, and these are some of the negative studies about swaddling as well from previous in history, if babies have spent too much time in early ages with their legs straight down, not flexed up or out in that nice wide position, they don't develop as deep of a hip socket, and that can lead to hip dysplasia or the hip not being in a nice position under the socket. So that's why we make sure that babies' hips are flexed up. And then as they hit that kind of 2, 3, 4 months up to 6 months, getting them nice and wide as well.
Awesome. And yeah, and I remember putting my daughter in the wrap sling and just like plopping her in. And you know what? It's such a lovely thing to do because we know those babies have just spent 9 months in this like tight, confined, warm, dark, right next to your heartbeat. And we're just reenacting that. So during that 4th trimester, so those few months after birth, we're reenacting that because they still really need all of that closeness. And so the kind of those really close carriers are a way to reenact that for our babies and for us as well, which is nice.
And if it feels like a bit of a kind of, there's so many options out there, when you buy whatever carrier you buy, it will always tell you whether you need that infant insert or not. So they will always tell you if it needs an infant insert or if you need to change something on the carrier to make it suitable for newborns. So they're either changeable and it tells you exactly how to change, whether it's the Velcro of where the legs sit or the straps of where the legs sit, or whether it needs an infant insert. And it's always really good just to double check that because sometimes we don't always realize that they need that infant insert for that newborn time.
Yeah, awesome. And I think we're going to chat a little bit about kind of your guys' personal recommendations or favorites of slings coming up. But I think another important piece is when you go into the stores to get your slings, they should be able to show you how to use it and how to put it on and how to properly position your newborn or your 6-month-old or whoever you're putting in this carrier. And so make sure that you get them to show you because it can be confusing sometimes if you go home, like installing your baby car seat the first time, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And also every store that I've been in, and I'm sure Megan, you would agree in Victoria anyway, they are so happy to help. If you just ask and say, how on earth do I make this carrier work? What do I do? They will 100% show you. And they always have demonstration models out that you can try on and see what works best because one of the things that Meg and I will go into is that not every carrier works for everybody. That's why there's so many different ones out there. And it's important to get one that feels very comfortable on you as well, because baby's position is very important, but whoever's carrying baby, their position as well. So especially as baby gets into that kind of 6-month range, babies get much heavier and all that weight tends to be on our fronts. And we really want to look after our own backs as well and be able to breathe ourselves and not hold our breath to gain that stabilization to support baby as well.
Yeah, and you may need to have a different one for you and your partner, and that's okay too, right? It's a good investment.
Yeah, definitely.
Hey, Sarah.
Yes, Alicia?
Did you have any problems with newborn sleep?
Oh my gosh, I sure did, especially with my first.
Me too. I wish I'd known more about what to expect going into it.
I know, and I wish that I had known to create a sleep plan with my partner.
I know. How can you support each other to get the sleep that you need while supporting your little baby?
Totally.
So guess what, guys? That's why we created the Newborn Sleep 101 course. In this course, we discuss what does newborn sleep look like and how can we help support that sweet little baby to become the best sleeper they can.
While also supporting you and your partner as you navigate this complex, sleep-deprived time.
We talk about how to set up your nursery or your bedroom to optimize both your sleep and your newborn sleep. And we also start talking about how you can start implementing routines and schedules into your day and your newborn so by the time they're 3 or 4 months, it's well established. Because guess what? That's when they start to really need it.
If you're interested in learning more, head to our website, www.shefoundhealth.com/courses.
We hope that you get better sleep than we did.
So why don't we chat a little bit about different types of carriers?
Sure. I'll start with so we're going to talk about 3 different types: slings, ring slings, wraps. That's more like your soft, really long piece often that you have to wrap around. And then when we say like a structured carrier, that'd be like your Ergo, your Lily Baby. There's a variety of brands. And just because we don't say a brand doesn't mean we don't recommend it. There's certain ones that are available in different countries and different areas. And the first thing I will say is a wonderful resource for parents, and maybe we can get Alicia to put this in show notes or something, but is hipdysplasia.org. They have it's very extensive list of hip healthy carriers. And what I like is it's not like there's probably 100 on there. Like it's not trying to judge people for the wrong carrier. It's really ones that have been certified by the Hip Dysplasia Institute for being hip healthy. Now that doesn't mean they've done research on it for mom's position or anything like that, but it's a great resource if you want to check to make sure. Honestly, I have not really found any mainstream carriers that I see in stores that aren't on that list, but they have done their homework and they've really vetted a lot of them. So just to go have a look at, that's a really helpful place to start as well if you're looking for a carrier.
And I'll put that in the show notes. I wrote it down.
Okay, perfect. So let's talk about wraps. I'll start with, I used and loved the Solly Baby. I know you guys did. We did a collab and we did a giveaway at some point. I really liked how lightweight it was. I had babies spring and summer, so it was hot. And structured carrier was very hot for me. So I really enjoyed that wrap. That's a favorite. There's a couple local makers too. The Beluga Baby I really like as well, that I've seen and had families really enjoy. It will depend on what your preference is, whether you want it more stretchy or not. The Solly Baby is not very stretchy. I really liked that for the structure that I could create. Some parents prefer one that has a little more stretch to it. Mobi Wrap, I believe, is one that I've also had some good experience with as well. So any of those 3, but truly there's lots of wraps out there. My biggest recommendation is that it needs to be able to pull baby nice and tight. If you're not able to create a nice tight hold with a wrap, you will strain your back. Particularly when you think about when you're carrying that newborn in a wrap, often it's that kind of 4th trimester. You're just come out, your abs are separated. You have already your low back's at risk, especially in a carrier like a wrap. If baby is hanging off you and not really nice and snug, you're just putting tons of pressure as a carrier on the low back and of the birth parent. That can be really, really just detrimental to your core and your back. So that's the biggest thing. So whether it's stretchy, whether it's not stretchy, whatever it takes for you to get a really nice, tight, snug hold of baby so that you're protecting your own back, that would be my number 1 recommendation.
Yeah, I use the Mobi Wrap, which is definitely more stretchy, although I had my kids in the summer, and so it was a bit hot because it's a thicker material, but I found it pretty easy to use and maneuver, and it was comfortable. So yeah, I never use any of those, just the woven ones that are less stretchy though. So
yeah, so it depends.
I had the Mobi Wrap as well, and it's definitely more stretchy. But all I would say with that one is that as baby gets bigger, you will need to change how you wrap yourself in it because it does start to give a little bit. And so just with those stretchier wraps, being aware that you may need to change how you're positioning that wrap to keep baby tight. And that can change month on month of how baby grows.
yeah, and I only used it in the newborn period, and then I switched over to the Ergo, the structured carrier. Yeah.
Do you want to talk about those structured carriers now? Some of our favorites?
Yeah. So the structured carriers, we love them because obviously they give that extra support, especially as baby gets bigger. So I think myself and Megan definitely transferred to that, yourself, Alicia, by the sounds of it, into that like more structured carrier from that kind of 2 to 3 month period, especially when baby's got that little bit more head control as well for that structured carrier. We both personally use Ergo. So Megan had the Ergo with the infant insert and I had the Omni Ergo. Reason being why I got the Omni was I had a spring baby and it was very hot. So I wanted to make sure that baby wasn't getting over hot in there. And that was one of the recommendations that we receive and read about for that heat piece as well. And then when we come to that structured carrier, the hips are definitely one of the biggest pieces there. And so, as I said previously, just really reading about what you need in that structured carrier to keep those hips and those knees above that hip, to keep that M position. And that's the slightly different piece when you move into these carriers, is that the structured carriers definitely are more of that M position, unless you're using that infant insert for those first few months where we're coming into that flex position. So when you're looking at the structured carriers, making sure that baby's head is supported, so how high that structured carrier is coming up on baby, and what you need to do on that specific carrier to change some of the straps around there. But also for yourself, so when you're trying some of the Tulas or the Lily Babies or all the other different brands of the structured carrier, it's really important to size it on yourself. And as we said earlier, you and your partner might need different carriers, and that is totally fine. And that's why it's great to give them all a bit of a try to feel what's comfortable on yourself. Because some carriers are just mainly shoulder support, but some should also come around your waist as well to support your lower back, especially as baby gets bigger and there's more and more pressure on that lower back as well. So the structured carriers are great as well because you can have them in different positions. So as baby gets a bit older, around that 6-month mark, and they've got good head control, they're starting to sit up gently, we can turn into that front-facing position. And the front-facing position in some of these structured carriers is really nice because it also helps to develop some of the strength in baby's legs as well, because they like to kick around in a bit more, and also can have a bit more of a look around as well and see a bit more of the world facing out, which they really enjoy as well. But again, making sure those legs are still in that M position, even in the face, and their arms are free as well at that point as well, so they're not stuck in the carrier with their arms, so checking where they are. From a head support point of view, when we start to turn baby forwards, that's not as necessary then, because you wouldn't turn baby forwards until they have really good head control. And so that's another benefit of that structured carrier.
And one thing to note about when you're facing them forward, we often get the question, well, can I turn them forward? I think they'd like it a lot better if they can face the world. We really don't want to turn forward until that 6-month range, as Sam said. Simply, the baby's got great head control, and that's true. 3-month-olds can have great head control, but it's that hip development is really important up to that 6-month mark. It is harder to get that really nice M in the forward facing. They can still be nice and wide, and Sam's Omni carrier showed this really well, that you can get their hips beautifully wide, but often the knees are a bit below the hips. When you hit that 6-7-month mark, that's a lot less of a concern, but that's why we don't want to turn baby before around that 6-month mark, so we can really make sure we're getting that nice M position of the hips.
Awesome. And then I think last we're going to talk a little bit about ring slings. Is that right?
So I don't think either of us use them a lot. So we don't have like personal experience with one particular brand. What I would always recommend though, and ones that I did try, is you want it to be nice, like a nice woven material that's not going to stretch out. Ring slings take a lot of pressure in one direction, and just fabric will stretch. So it wants to be a nice, like if there's even any stretch to the fabric, generally that will likely, you're going to have to just probably keep thinking of tightening because you might lose some integrity of the fabric. Another thing with ring slings to be really aware of, particularly if you're using it with quite a small young baby and you're trying to follow that T.I.C.K.S, make sure their airway. Another thing is making sure that the fabric is really breathable. Again, as you said, Alicia, we're talking about the preemies. Their breathing is really important, and so if there's not enough breathability in the fabric, then you could end up having some concerns there as well. All of the research about ring slings really focuses mostly on the parent actually using it. It's obviously not ideal as far as ergonomics go. You're generally putting pressure on one side at a time. So where we don't necessarily want to use them with super young babies because of the airway concern, as babies get heavier, it puts more pressure on the carrier's shoulder. So that's something to just consider. Ring slings they can be really wonderful if one is following that T.I.C.K.S principle, if the fabric is correct and there's enough breathability. And I would highly advise that you switch sides that you're carrying the ring sling on, so you're not putting all that pressure. We tend to get pretty one-sided as parents. Only can change diapers this way. This is how I put you. But trying to switch sides at least, so because it can really end up causing some neck and shoulder issues in the person doing the carrying as well. So I don't have any brands for you, but those are the things to look out for with a ring sling.
Yeah, and we chatted a little bit about that one-sidedness in our plagiocephaly torticollis chat, right? Because we all get in the habit of doing the same thing. And so those babies are always looking the same way. And then they can just, one muscle gets a bit tighter and the other one is a bit more stretched out. And so they have a preference, and then they get a bit more of a flat spot on that side. And so the same thing would apply with any of the carriers really, because they're naturally going to look one way or the other. They're not going to look straight at you. And so just making sure you're rotating your baby's head within reason. You don't have to keep a logbook of it, but just making sure you're thinking about rotating the side. And so if you're using a ring sling, same thing, you would want to alternate sides for your baby as well, because they have to be like, they're going to be in one position on if your ring sling's on one shoulder versus the other. So that's a really good kind of tip there. Thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah. And yeah, we always tell parents, like, it's even just being aware of it. Oh, actually, I've never noticed. I will pay attention next time to if they always look one way or the other in the sling or in the carrier or the wrap. Yeah. Just being aware of it is usually enough.
I think overall, I think the biggest tip is trying them on before you buy one. I think that's really important for your positioning, but also what feels comfortable for you as well. I know for myself, the wrap was difficult in the beginning and then got much, much easier. So I think just trying them on is a really good tip. And then having somebody look and saying, oh, those hips in that end position, or oh, they're like in that flex position, or using the mirror to see, because it's really hard to look down and see if baby's in the right position as well.
And my other little tip that I just thought of is YouTube. Most of the, especially the wraps, because they're hard to put on, but even the Ergos, like all of those companies have their own, like usually have YouTube videos. So if you get home and you're like, that's cool, they showed me in the store, but I totally don't remember, because none of us are like that. We don't ever forget anything as moms and busy people. But heading home and just checking out the YouTube, I had to watch the Solly Baby one probably 4 times before I got in the hang of putting it on. So that's a super helpful resource. Is any of those companies, any of the wraps or carriers, they'll usually have a great video that shows you how to put it on.
So any final tips or tricks or suggestions that you guys wanted to mention? I feel like when I had my babies, there were like baby wearing experts in all kinds of towns who would come over and help you and show you a few different ways and all that type of stuff. So that's another excellent resource. I'm sure there's Facebook groups or local, like you could just, I'm sure there's all that kind of resources in most major centers anyways. One thing I just wanted to mention around safety for your infant is being very cautious about when you have a baby in your carrier and when you're sleep exhausted and you are trying to drink your coffee. If you spill that boiling hot coffee on your little baby, that's not a good thing. So just being very aware of when you are doing some baby wearing, that you're doing it safely. So don't be cooking with a sharp knife. Don't be using boiling hot water. When your child is bigger and they're forward facing, they can actually reach out and grab stuff. So like they can grab a pot off the stove. So just being very aware of that when you are doing kind of baby wearing is to do it in a safe way as well. It's an amazing thing, but it also sometimes when we're a bit sleep deprived, we don't always make the best choices. So just being something to have in the back of the mind.
Yeah, and even navigating stairs and stuff, especially in those early days when you're a little bit balance is off, core's off, you've got a carrier on the front of you, just grab the rail, grab the handrail, just do it thoughtfully to navigate stairs, because you can't necessarily see your feet. So when you're pregnant, that's the same. So but just being careful, about navigating stairs and obstacles and stuff, especially when you're just getting used to baby wearing.
Awesome, guys. And where can people find you on the old social media if they want to learn more? Because I know you actually have some great posts, because we shared a few of your posts on baby wearing before, but where can people find you?
Yeah, there's some great videos or like clips on our Instagram, which is at Island Kids Physio. And we actually have a range of wraps and structured carriers on there and showing different age babies in those carriers, which is a really nice resource as well.
Great. And then if you're in Victoria and you have concerns around your baby, then you can always check these guys out, and they will, I'm sure, happily see you as physiotherapists in their clinic, which they are expanding, it sounds. And you guys also have a course you're putting out, which I am really excited about. Tell me a little bit more about that.
Sure. We're in the process of creating a few, but the one that's ready is the 3 to 6 month, and it's infant motor development. So it talks through just general motor milestones, things to watch for, ways to help your baby develop their motor milestones, all that from a perspective of we're trying to show this is not for other professionals. This is for you, the reality of the day-to-day, how you can help baby, what to watch for, any red flags, those sort of things. We voiced it over because we know what it's like to be a busy parent. So it's slides, but also we just talk over it. So we tell the course, you can listen to it and go back later. And there's a few also handouts as part of it with the kind of general motor milestones for each age and play ideas as well. So if you head to our social media at Island Kids Physio, there is a link in our bio to go where to purchase it. It's hosted on a platform called Embody. And we can also Alicia, we can send you what the link is to go directly there as well.
Yeah, I'll post it in the show notes. That's awesome. So great. Because we have so many questions around that. Tummy time and how to play with your your younger baby and what kinds of things that you can do to really foster that development. So I think that's fabulous for putting that together. Very exciting. Thank you guys so much. And we will talk soon, because I think we're going to do a tummy time one coming up.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening. Make sure to check out our website at www.shefoundhealth.ca and to sign up for our community for weekly bump blasts. Make sure to check us out on Instagram or Facebook at she.found.motherhood and head on over to your favorite podcast app and leave a review and a 5-star rating. If you enjoyed this podcast, take a pic of yourself listening to it and share it on social. Make sure to tag us on it so we know to keep making them.